jump. Another fun way to use JavaScript on web pages is to animate DOM properties over time. Before we can do that, however, I need to make sure that you know about another global variable that is available on every web page, the window variable. Here, I will console.log it, and you can pause, check out your dev tools, and see what's inside it. Did you see? It is huge. It contains so much. It is overwhelming. To make it a little less overwhelming, I will tell you some of my favorite properties and methods that you can access on it. There is window.location, which has a bunch of information about the URL of the page. And actually, let's go and just write it out to the page so that you don't have to keep pausing. So text content, and then we're just going to say the URL of this page is window.location, and then that's an object, so we need to reach inside and say .href. And there you go. That's actually the URL of the iframed web page on the side. Another property is window.navigator.userAgent, which tells you about the browser of the user. And say the browser that we'll call the user agent is plus window.navigator.userAgent. Okay, that user agent string probably looks pretty crazy to you. It's not really meant to be human readable, and it doesn't always make a lot of sense for historical reasons. So most web developers use libraries to actually understand what that string means and what browser they're on and what OS and all of that, because it is very weird. And here's one that's not so weird. So window.outerWidth and window.outerHeight. So let's say this web page is, let's see, window.outerWidth. So do the width first by window.outerHeight. So it says, to me it says 1280 by 715, but maybe it says something different to you depending on what your web page looks like when you're viewing this talk through. Now, let me show you something a little surprising. I'm going to delete the window part of this line of code. And so what happens is that it still works. That is because window is the default global variable on web pages. When the browser looks for a variable that you use, it will look for it on the window object. And when you create a new global variable, the window object will actually store it as a property. That means that you should not declare your own variables named outer width and outer height, because then they'll override window.outerWidth and window.outerHeight. Generally, you should avoid global variables altogether, since it's so easy for them to collide with each other or existing variables on the window. To be extra safe, you can prefix your global variables. Like at Khan Academy, we write KA underscore in front of any global variables that we have to have. Okay, so that's the window object. Now we're going to see how you can use two functions on it to make animations. I've got this web page with a picture of Onos, who is freaking out that the world is going to end soon, specifically in 500 seconds. I want to make this web page way more useful by turning this number into a live countdown so that visitors can see exactly how much time they have left. Now, when we animate part of a web page, the strategy is to find some element in it, then change something about that element, and do that a particular number of times a second. So for the first step, I will find the countdown by ID. Simple. So countdown equals document.get element by ID countdown. For the second step, I'll make a function that counts down. Bar count it down equals function. And what we'll do is I want to set the text content, and I want to set it equal to the previous number minus 1. And the text content will actually be a string, so we want to turn it into a number. We can do that using parse float. And then we can subtract 1 from it. Okay, so finally, we want to call this function on an interval, which means a certain number of times per second. And we can use that using window.setInterval. And this function takes 2 arguments, the callback function and the number of milliseconds to wait before that function gets called back again. We can specify the callback function just like we specify it for event listeners by name. And then it's going really fast right now because we haven't specified the second argument. So for that, we want it to be a certain number of milliseconds, and we want it once per second. So we're going to say 1,000 because there are 1,000 milliseconds in a second. There we go. Now it's counting down 1 per second. So you better learn as much as you can in the next 490 seconds. There is one more window function that we sometimes use instead of set interval, and that's set timeout. And I'll just change it to that and see if you can see the difference. I have to wait a second. Okay, so now maybe you can see that when we use set timeout, the browser only calls the function once, not repeatedly. That's not so useful for when we're making animations, but it can be super useful in other cases. Like if we showed a warning banner to our users and then we wanted to hide it after 10 seconds. So let me change this back to set interval.